When Amy Winehouse dropped the microphone mid-song, 12,000 people fell silent. Not because the sound cut out. Not because something went wrong. But because they knew they were about to witness something that transcended music. Rain was pouring down, stage lights cutting through the darkness like searchlights, and in the front row, a young woman stood frozen, tears mixing with rainwater on her face. Amy stepped to the edge of the stage, looked down at her, and did something no one expected. She took off her black leather jacket, the one she wore in every show, the one that had become part of her identity, and reached down to hand it to the crying girl. The crowd erupted. But this wasn't just a moment of generosity. This was the beginning of a story that would change a life, haunt a legacy, and remind the world that behind the headlines and the chaos, Amy Winehouse was deeply, painfully human. Subscribe now, because what happens next will break your heart and put it back together. The rain had started an hour before the show. London's Shepherd's Bush Empire was packed beyond capacity, fans crammed shoulder to shoulder, umbrellas creating a sea of black domes outside the venue. Inside, the air was thick with humidity, anticipation, and that electric energy that only happens when people gather to see an artist they love desperately. Amy Winehouse was at the peak of her fame, but also at the edge of her fragility. Back to Black had turned her into a global icon, but everyone knew the cost. The tabloids followed her every move, dissecting her struggles, her relationships, her pain. And yet when she stepped onto that stage, drenched in stage lights and vulnerability, none of that mattered. She was there to sing. She was there to connect. In the front row stood Emma Clarke, 23 years old, a nurse from Manchester who had saved for months to buy this ticket. She wasn't just a fan. Amy's music had pulled her through the darkest period of her life. 2 years earlier, Emma had lost her mother to cancer. The grief was unbearable, suffocating. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped believing that life could ever feel whole again. And then one night, alone in her apartment, she put on Back to Black. Amy's voice, raw and broken and somehow still standing, gave her permission to feel everything she'd been holding in. Emma played that album on repeat for months. It became her therapy, her survival kit, her proof that pain didn't have to be the end of the story. Now, standing in the rain-soaked crowd, watching Amy take the stage in her signature beehive and heavy eyeliner, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. She wasn't just here to hear the songs. She was here to thank the woman who had saved her life without even knowing it. But what Amy was about to do would turn that gratitude into something neither of them could have predicted. Amy opened with Rehab, and the venue exploded. Her voice, smoky and soul-deep, filled every corner of the room. She moved across the stage with that unique combination of confidence and fragility, like someone who knew exactly who they were but wasn't sure if the world could handle it. The crowd sang every word back to her, a wall of sound that seemed to hold her up even as she swayed slightly, eyes closed, lost in the music. But halfway through, "You know I'm no good," something shifted. Amy stopped mid-verse. The band kept playing for a few seconds before they noticed and trailed off into silence. The crowd murmured, confused. Technical issue? Was she okay? Amy wasn't looking at the lights or the band. She was looking down into the front row. At Emma. Emma had been crying quietly, overwhelmed by the moment, by the music, by the fact that she was actually here, breathing the same air as the woman whose voice had kept her alive. She hadn't meant to draw attention. She was just feeling. But Amy saw her. And in that look, something passed between them that didn't need words. Amy knew that face. She'd seen it in her own mirror 1,000 times. The face of someone holding on by a thread, desperately trying to believe that tomorrow might be better. Amy knelt down at the edge of the stage, rain still falling in sheets around her. She looked at Emma and said, just loud enough for the front rows to hear, "You all right, love?" Emma couldn't speak. She just shook her head, tears streaming faster now. Amy nodded slowly, like she understood everything Emma couldn't say. Then, without hesitation, she stood up and took off her black leather jacket. The same jacket she'd worn on magazine covers, in music videos, on stages around the world. It was more than clothing. It was armor. It was identity. And she was handing it down to a stranger in the rain. "Here," Amy said softly, leaning down as far as she could. "You need this more than I do tonight." Emma reached up with trembling hands and took the jacket. It was still warm from Amy's body. The crowd around her gasped, some started crying themselves, others pulled out phones to capture the moment, but most just stood in stunned silence, witnessing something sacred. Amy stood back up, soaked from the rain now, wearing only her black tank top. She picked up the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and said, "Sometimes we all need a little something to hold on to, yeah?" The crowd roared. And then she sang, "Love is a losing game." And it was the most beautiful, heartbreaking performance anyone in that venue had ever heard. Because it wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a conversation between two souls who understood what it meant to hurt, to fight, to keep going even when the world felt impossibly heavy. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Subscribe and let's keep Amy's legacy alive together. After the show, Emma stood outside the venue, still clutching the jacket, unsure if what had just happened was real. Other fans approached her, asking to touch the jacket, to take photos, to hear the story. But Emma barely heard them. She was replaying the moment in her mind, over and over. The way Amy had looked at her. Not with pity, but with recognition. With solidarity. When Emma got back to her hotel room that night, she found something in the jacket pocket. A crumpled piece of paper with Amy's handwriting. "Keep fighting. You're stronger than you know." Emma broke down. Not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming realization that she wasn't alone. That her pain had been seen, acknowledged, and met with compassion by someone who knew exactly what it felt like. She kept that jacket. Not as a trophy or a piece of memorabilia, but as a reminder. On her worst days, when the grief threatened to swallow her again, she would put it on and remember that moment in the rain. Remember that Amy Winehouse, in the middle of her own storms, had stopped everything to make sure one person in the crowd knew they mattered. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened next would show just how deeply that night affected both of them. Amy's team later said that night changed something in her. After the Shepherd's Bush show, she started doing something she'd never done before, scanning the crowd during performances, looking for the ones who were hurting. She'd stop mid-song, call out to someone crying in the back, ask if they were okay, dedicate a song to them. It became her ritual, her way of turning the stage into a place of healing instead of just performance. Friends close to Amy said she talked about Emma often in the weeks after that show. She'd asked her manager if there was any way to reach her, to check if she was doing all right. She carried the memory of that rain-soaked moment with her like a talisman. Proof that despite everything the tabloids said, despite all the ways she was struggling, she could still make a difference in someone's life. Emma, for her part, went back to nursing with a renewed sense of purpose. She started working in palliative care, helping families navigate the kind of loss she knew so intimately. And she told every patient the same thing Amy had told her that night. "Keep fighting. You're stronger than you know." The jacket hangs in Emma's home now, framed behind glass. Not because she wants to preserve it as memorabilia, but because it represents something bigger than a concert moment. It represents the human capacity to see someone else's pain and respond with love instead of looking away. It represents Amy Winehouse not as a tabloid headline or a cautionary tale, but as she truly was, a woman with an enormous heart who understood suffering because she lived it every day, and who chose, again and again, to use her pain to comfort others. When Amy passed away in 2011, Emma was one of thousands who mourned. But her grief was different. She didn't just lose an artist she admired. She lost someone who had seen her in her darkest moment, and reached down to pull her back from the edge. At Amy's memorial, Emma wore the jacket. And when asked by reporters why, she simply said, "Because she gave me more than a piece of clothing that night. She gave me permission to survive." The rain that fell during that concert has been described by those who were there as almost biblical, like the sky itself was crying. But Emma sees it differently now. She believes the rain was washing something away, making space for something new to grow. And in that sacred space between stage and crowd, between one broken heart and another, Amy Winehouse planted a seed of hope that continues to bloom years after her voice went silent. That's the legacy the tabloids never captured. Not the struggles, not the headlines, but the countless small acts of humanity that defined who Amy really was. A woman who stopped her own show to make sure a stranger in the rain knew they weren't alone. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe to keep stories like this alive. And if you're going through something right now, remember Amy's words, keep fighting. You're stronger than you know. The black leather jacket, the rain, the moment of connection, they're all part of music history now. But more than that, they're proof that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the most weight. That sometimes stopping the show is more important than finishing the song. And that Amy Winehouse, for all her struggles and pain, understood something fundamental about what it means to be human. We're all just trying to survive the rain. And sometimes, all it takes is someone willing to give you their jacket and tell you it's going to be okay. Emma still visits Amy's memorial in Camden every year on the anniversary of that concert. She brings flowers, but she also brings letters from people who've heard the story and found hope in it. Letters from strangers who say they needed to hear that someone out there understood their pain. Letters that prove Amy's legacy isn't just her music, but the ripple effect of her compassion. The jacket itself has become something of a legend in the fan community. People have offered Emma tens of thousands of pounds for it. Collectors, museums, even some of Amy's own family members have asked if she'd consider donating it. But Emma always gives the same answer. It was given to me in a moment when I needed saving. I can't put a price on that. She's right. Because what happened that rainy night in London wasn't a transaction. It wasn't about celebrity or memorabilia or even music, really. It was about two human beings recognizing each other's pain across the divide of fame and anonymity, and choosing connection over indifference. In the years since Amy's death, Emma has spoken at mental health conferences, sharing her story not to glorify struggle but to remind people that compassion can be a lifeline. She talks about how one moment of genuine human kindness gave her the strength to rebuild her life. She talks about how Amy, despite drowning in her own demons, still had the presence of mind to reach out and save someone else. People remember Amy for her voice, Emma often says. But I remember her for her eyes. The way she looked at me that night, she didn't see a fan. She saw herself. And in that recognition, she gave me the greatest gift anyone can give another person, the feeling of being truly seen. The leather jacket, now carefully preserved, bears the marks of that night. Water stains from the rain. A small tear in the sleeve. The faint smell of Amy's perfume, somehow still lingering after all these years. But more than anything, it carries the weight of a promise kept. The promise that pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. That even in our darkest moments, we have the power to light the way for someone else. What makes this story even more profound is what Emma discovered years later. When she finally opened up about her experience online, hundreds of people reached out with their own stories. Other fans who had received similar kindness from Amy. A teenager in Manchester who Amy had called from backstage after seeing him crying at a meet and greet. A woman in New York who Amy sent flowers to after learning she'd lost a child. These weren't publicity stunts. They were quiet acts of humanity that Amy never publicized, never used for her image. They were simply who she was when the cameras weren't rolling. Emma keeps a journal now, documenting not just her own healing journey, but the stories of others who were touched by Amy's compassion. She calls it the Jacket Project, a testament to how one person's kindness can create ripples that extend far beyond a single moment. And every entry begins the same way. Today, someone needed a jacket in the rain. And on rainy nights, when Emma puts on that jacket and closes her eyes, she can still hear Amy's voice cutting through the storm. You all right, love? And now, finally, she can answer. Yes. Because of you.